Well, a very, very good morning to you, and welcome back again to my podcast. My name is Cassim Kaweesa. And in this week, what I'd like to talk to you about, and the topic that I'd like to really explore, is around this subject of why talking about suicide out loud can save lives, and why talking about this subject in its totality really can be useful for those of us who are living in England, and in the UK in general. So let me begin off by sharing a couple of things that I think are useful. The other day, I was looking up the statistics as to the amount of people that died every week or died by suicide every week. So in England, around 115 people die by suicide each week. So roughly, that's about 500 people who essentially die. Um, and we know that suicide is the leading cause of death for men under the age of 50 in the UK. Men make up about three-quarters of all suicide deaths. And the highest rates are often amongst men of aged 45 to 54. But the rates amongst younger men, so essentially ages 15 to 29, have actually been rising. So that essentially means that every 90 seconds or so, um, a man, a father, a son, a brother, a friend, a neighbor, the guy who works down the shop, the guy who works in Tesco's, a young man, really, relatively anyone who's under the age of 70, to me, technically is young, dies by suicide. They take their own life. For whatever reason, they feel that they cannot go on anymore. And there are multiple reasons as to why that is, which I'll get into in just a second. But I found it really, really interesting that when you look at the highest risk age groups for male suicide, these are ages 45 to 49, 50 to 54, and young people under the ages of 20. But also, what I found really interesting is that if you look at the regions as to where the suicides tend to happen are typical. So you've got area in England, you've got areas like northwest, northeast, and east of England. And ironically, London actually has some of the lowest rates of suicide in the country. I also think it's important to recognize that that 2023 marked the highest overall suicide rate since 1999, which means that suicide rates have been rising across all age groups since 2022. Um, and just to give you a breakdown of these areas that I just talked about. So when you're looking at these areas where suicide rates are highest, you're looking at cities like Manchester, Liverpool, Preston, Blackpool, Bolton, Salford, Lancaster, Carlisle, Greater Manchester, Merseyside, Cumbria, Cheshire. You're looking at places like Newcastle, Sunderland, Middlesbrough, South Shields, Northumberland, Cambridge, Ipswich, Chelmsford, Luton, Petersburg. These are the kinds of areas that you're looking at for suicide. And what I find really interesting is that many of these areas are quite similar. The demographic is quite similar. And the demographic of, and I'm generalizing here, of course, each area is completely different in that there will be a breakdown of different cultures, of different traditions and stuff like that. But one of the themes, if you look at all these areas, is that these are sort of mining towns. These are men on the ground kind of jobs. These are working class areas. And part of the thing that I think is really important to understand about these areas is that many of these areas are deprived, right? Many of these areas are really, really, really struggling. I looked up the five main causes of suicide in the UK, and this is what I found. I found So these are the five. So the first one is mental health conditions. So you're looking at things like depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, right? Untreated or poorly managed mental health is the strongest predictor of suicide. And when you look at some of these areas, in these areas, there's going to be a lot of stigma. There's going to be a lot of stoicism. Men have to be tough. Men have to be strong. Men have to have it together. What matters is productivity. What matters is sticking with the family. Family in many of these places is very, very, very strong, actually. And actually, weirdly enough, family and support can actually be a positive factor to protecting people, but it can also be negative if your family doesn't allow for any plasticity, if it doesn't allow for any leeway for people to be able to, I remember writing a book in which I said that the ideal environment for a child to grow in is an environment in which the parents or the carers create an environment in which the child has boundaries, but within those boundaries can explore to the max of their potential. And eventually, when they reach a certain age, they can even break through of those boundaries if they wish, without being shamed, without being judged, without being oppressed, without being kicked out, um, or isolated. And if you look at a lot of depression, mental health conditions, schizophrenia, psychosis, bipolar, many people are isolated, they are cast out, they are rejected, and they're stigmatized when they have these mental health conditions. And I always have to remind people that you have to understand that in order for your mind to get to the point where it is, for example, have, for example, let's look at multiple personality. This, I don't like that word disorder, but we'll go with the what it says. So if you look at, for example, multiple personality disorder, which is what it used to be called before, what happens is that they're splitting essentially, right? So the mind splits, well, the self rather splits, and what I have to remind people is that look, that is a coping mechanism. The person was so in so much pain, their self was so violated, whether it's through trauma, rape, pedophilia, incest, whatever it may be. The self was so violated that the only way that the person could protect themselves is they had to split, they had to detach, they had to literally rip themselves apart so that their core essence of them doesn't get damaged fully. And the problem is, people don't see that. What people see is this person who is sick, who is ill, who is maybe presenting in ways that may be unpredictable. They may be presenting in ways that may be, for some people, they may not feel they may not feel safe, and so they isolate the person instead of understanding and bringing the person into the community. What ends up happening is we isolate them, and there's already a bigger problem, which is unfortunately society and the way British society and the way in which we see men is that we see men as disposable. We just want to get rid of men. We see men as you as easily cast away, and you see this with wars. When there is a war going on, who's the one who always goes to war? Men. Women and children do not go to war, which means that for whatever reason, we do not value men to the same value as we do mothers and children. Yet they're still human. And there are men who will stand on that hill and they'll say to me, Cassim, you're crazy for even suggesting or challenging this. They don't see their value. They think that they're lesser than, that they can just sacrifice this precious human life. And society and cultures continuously keep reinforcing this. So when a man indeed is struggling these mental health conditions, which of course some of them can be inherited, we know that, but many of these are not inherited. They are based on nurture. The person has had to learn how to survive in the various system, whether it's the education system, the family system, the healthcare system, and the some of the ways in which they have found is to repress themselves, is to this can lead to bipolar, this can lead to depression, clinical depression, schizophrenia, uh, generalized anxiety disorder. It can lead to all kinds of things. And instead, what ends up happening is we don't talk about this as a community. We don't bring them into the community. What we do is we isolate them. The second thing that I found out is one of the main causes of suicide in the UK is relationship breakdown. I'm sure I don't need to tell you about this because I've talked about this so many times. Relationship breakdown meaning divorce or separation, loss of contact with children, especially for fathers, family conflict. Men are particularly at risk after relationship breakdowns due to societal isolation and identity loss. A lot of men attach who they are, what they can do, um, and their role and their destiny and their purpose to the role of being a spouse or a father. And so when that gets removed, then they are left in free fall. They're left without a psychological framework to which they can work onto, which for many of them, they go to the pain is so much and overwhelming that they go towards suicide. The third is financial and employment stress. So we're talking about things like debt, unemployment, job insecurity, being made redundant. Economic pressure and shame around financial failure are common suicide trigger for many men, especially between the ages of 35 and 54. I'll remind all of us that society does not see men today, even going back into the past, from their value as having inherent value, we see them as from the point of view of productivity. The more that they produce, the more successful they are, the more productive they are, the more valuable they are. Now, there are rare cases in which there are family and cultures and friends which value a man irrelevant of how productive he is. But society doesn't like men who are not productive. We just don't. Every system is set up to encourage and to push men to be productive in the workplace. And any man, when a man loses his job, the first thing everyone wants him to do is to go and get his job, is to go and get a job. We don't like men just existing. We want them to always be productive, moving, which is part of the reason why many men never go to therapy. Because in order to go to therapy, you have to stop, you have to reflect, you have to go inward. So much of how men present is about chauvinistic, impressing other people, looking amazing. But actually, so much of discovering who we are and getting to know ourselves is about stopping and going inward and actually not trying to impress anybody, just being, just existing, just awareness, just gratitude for life, for the flowers, for health. And a lot of men haven't sat with that. In fact, they feel it's uncomfortable. Vulnerability, intimacy is very uncomfortable for a lot of men. I've heard men say, don't to other men, don't touch me, don't come too close to me. Why are you so close to me? The fourth thing that leads to suicide is, and I'm sure again this is going to be no surprise, is substance misuse, alcohol and drug misuse, dual diagnosis where you've got addiction and mental health, substances in lower inhibition and increased impulsivity, making suicidal thoughts more likely to turn into actions. It's interesting because when you look at the research around suicide, there are many men um, who survived a suicide attempt. And when you interview them and you listen to them, they say they regretted it the moment that they did it. Because many times they were under the influence of alcohol. We have a serious undertalked issue in the UK that we don't really talk about, which is around people who are hospitalized or end up in hospital because of weed, cannabis, where they have basically um, they have a breakdown whilst on weed. Because you know what weed does is well, what's the word I'm looking for? It is an hallucinogen. It detaches you and it makes your mind hallucinate. And sometimes that can take you to some dark places which you don't know how to return from. And that's something we as a society are just not talking about. And in many of these towns where you've got men who are doing very manual jobs, people who are isolated, they there isn't very much to do. It can send men down a very spiral, down a road where they find substances to try to dampen or to soften the isolation and just the awareness to existence. Awareness actually sometimes can be too much. And the last one, and you've seen this as a common thread through all of this, is social isolation and loneliness, lack of close connections, living alone, feeling like a burden. Chronic loneliness and feeling disconnected from others increases risk, particularly amongst older adults and younger men. We know this. So those are the five things that, if you look at, do uh, in the UK here, the five main causes of suicide. But, and I think those are really important because when you start to look at that and then you start to look at why is it that if we start talking about this, it can save lives, you begin to see a connection. Because one of the first things that I wrote down here is that when we start talking about suicide, one of the ways in which it can save lives is that it breaks the silence that fuels shame. Most people, most people thinking about suicide are drowning in silence. Talking breaks the power of secrecy, which often keeps people isolated, ashamed, and spiraling deeper. Silence kills. Speech gives space. What we don't talk about, we learn to suffer in silence. And for a lot of people, they don't have the language. This is why I'm such an advocate for therapy. I'm such an advocate for therapy because in therapy, you get a space where you're not judged. You get a space where it's a space. There's a lot of, I keep saying this to people that the only place that I can think of where men are quote unquote safe to go and explore how they feel is the barbershop. The barbershop is really the only place that is safe. Even within therapy itself, I'm just going to be honest, there is a lot of judgment. This is the reality. The reality should be that therapy should be wonderful and accepting and non-judgmental, and the therapist should be congruent. But sometimes that is not the reality. And it only takes for one bad experience like that for the person to basically reject therapy. But I always say to people, therapy works. It's the therapists that are the problem. So your role is to find the right therapist, because if you can find the right therapist, my God, the incredible work that you can do in a very short period of time is absolutely incredible. To find somewhere where you can explore yourself, explore all the different parts of you, whether it's your sexuality, your purpose, your vision, your capacity, your relationships, whether you're talking about money, you're talking about employment. It is absolutely incredible to find somewhere where you can talk about what you can give voice to that which is internal and get it out of you without feeling shame. Shame is one of the most undertalked emotions for men. And unfortunately, when it comes to shame, shame is the biggest tool that society uses to correct men or to get men to do what they want. The problem is when men feel shame, what they do is they disconnect and they isolate themselves. They're not inspired, they're not encouraged by feeling shame. At the moment, I've shared with you guys that I'm writing a book about why some fathers you abandon their children and become absent fathers. And part of the reason, and I've been basically looking at trying to find research that talks about this experience from a male perspective, and there isn't any. There isn't research. There aren't many books written on this subject. So there's loads of books written from the mother's perspective, from the child's perspective, but there are not very many books written from the father's perspective who has abandoned or quote unquote abandoned his family or been a deadbeat dad or been an absent father. And that just goes to show you how much people shame it. The biggest tool that people use to get men to re-engage with family and to connect and have contact is to shame them. The problem is that makes them run away, which is why you speak to many people and you say to them, "What happened to the father?" And they'll say, "I don't know. He just never came back." Men isolate them. When men experience shame, what they do is they isolate themselves. They don't become inspired, right? And I think that's a really, really, really important thing for us to really recognize. The other thing that I wrote down here is it validates the real pain when we talk about it. When someone hears their thoughts spoken out loud, either by themselves or someone else, it helps them realize they're not crazy, not weak, and not alone. Their pain it becomes real, not invisible, and real pain can be treated. Saying it doesn't saying it doesn't make it any worse. It gives it shape, and once it has shape, it can be faced. A lot of people, the pain that they're experiencing is abstract. It's in the air. They can't really describe it. This is why language is so important because when I work with men in therapy, one of the things that they really struggle with is finding the language. But once you've found the language of grief, depression, anxiety, ADHD, shame, anger, frustration, unworthiness, failure. Once you get these words, then you have a shape. Then you have something tangible, something that you can work with, something that you can mold, something that you can poke at, something which you can chisel down or you can start chipping at, or something which you can reform into something useful, something that can be of benefit to you. But I think there is a lot of men who have never been validated. This is why I'm writing this book about why some men abandon their children, because there's a lot of men who've never been validated. I mean, we talk about validation for women, we should validate their pain, we should validate what they went through, but we do not talk about men in the same way. We talk about them toughen up, be my little soldier, boys shouldn't cry, power through, man up, get on with it, be a man, suffer through it. Vulnerability is not uh, encouraged, and vulnerability is not rewarded in society, in British society for men, which is why so many of them they feel like failures. I'm not worthy. I'm not enough. No one cares. I'll never amount to anything. My family would be better off without me. The world would be better off without me. This is the kind of rhetoric that many men talk about and they use. But the thing is, it's in their head and they think it's so bad that no one ever says anything to them. It's one of the things that I encourage people to do that if you feel or you have an inkling that someone is suicidal, ask them, are you suicidal? Have you been having thoughts of killing yourself, of dying by suicide? Talking about suicide does not, what's the word I'm looking for? Talking about suicide does not make the person more likely to actually do it. What it does is it empowers them. What it does is it gives them power over, it liberates them, it validates them, and it gives them power over what they've been feeling because they're like, oh my God, I'm not crazy. Oh my God, I'm not mad. There's a lot of boys and men who think that they're mad. There's a lot of boys and men who think that they're crazy and that what they're going through, they're the only person who've gone through. They are what we call catastrophizing, when in reality, this may be a season which they're going through. The other thing that I wrote down here is that when we talk about suicide and suicidal thoughts and dark thoughts, it opens up the door for connection. You can't be helped unless someone knows. Speaking about suicidal thoughts gives others the chance to step in. offer support, and make a plan. It invites connection, the very thing suicide invites you, the very thing that suicide convinces you is impossible. Suicide tells you no one cares. Speaking lets you find out that that's a lie. There's always someone who cares. When I wrote my book about suicide, um, one of the things that I said in that book is there are people out there who can help you. There are people out there who can support you, but they may not look like you. They may not be your blood. They may not be Muslims. They may not be Christians. But there are people out there who, and this is really weird, who can care more about you than your own blood. In fact, ironically, some of the people who help people the most who are feeling suicidal are usually professionals, neighbors, colleagues, best friends. There's a lot of people who are growing up in households or family systems that do not allow for them to express mental health. Don't bring that juju in this house. That's secularism. You're overreacting. Pray more. They're not taken seriously. And if you're not, this is what I was talking about earlier on about mental health and and community, because one of the things that disconnects people is contact. It's connection. If you isolate somebody because you stigmatize them for their mental health, what ends up happening is they then don't have contact. They have no connection. There isn't this human thread which binds us. There is no intimacy. And we know, for example, things like hugging, things like laughing, humor, being made fun of, not in a bad way, but in terms of recognizing like dark humor. Um, looking into somebody's eyes, being in somebody's presence, that kind of connection and contact is really, really useful for people. But you can't have that if you're being isolated. And you can see how people can just then spiral because then it leads to more drinking. And then as they drink more, they isolate themselves more. And then they have to lie more. And then they have to shame. They shame themselves. And then the thoughts in their head become worse. The other thing that I wrote down here is that when we talk about suicide, it gives people tools, not just sympathy. Many people don't know what to say to someone who's suicidal. Talking about it teaches people what to listen for, how to ask questions, how to sit with someone in darkness without trying to fix them. Talking isn't just venting, it's education, it's equipping, and it's empowering. It's ironic when people say to people who are suicidal, "Oh, your family is going to miss you. You're going to be, if you do this to your family, you're going to make your family suffer," as if the person doesn't know. People who are suicidal, they've thought about all of these things. They've tried different ways to get rid of the pain and the noises in their head. The problem is, it hasn't worked. They've thought about all of these various things. So really, what they're looking for, what they need is space. They need compassion. They need validation. They need someone to just listen. The other thing that I wrote down here, which is actually attached to that, is it when we talk about suicide, it normalizes help seeking. When suicide becomes a part of a real conversation, not hidden or taboo, it shows others that seeking help, things like therapy, medication, or community support, is a strength. It's empowering. It's not shameful, right? Isn't this what we hear men say all the time? I don't want to ask for help because it's a weakness. You're not weak for needing help. You're human. We cannot, there is no such thing as perfectionism. Everyone has flaws. Everyone makes mistakes. We're just human. We're all really just trying our best to try and trottle through life, do the best that we can with what we've got, and just trying to do to make it through, make another day. I think many of us look at people who are successful and we think they have it together, they know everything. To be honest with you, I would disagree. I don't think that most people know what they're doing. I think they're just making it up day by day. They might have systems or they might have habits that are beneficial for them and that work. But beyond that, I think, and that doesn't guarantee anything. How many people, you saw what happened in the 2008, 2007, 2008 market crashes? Loads of people, they thought that they had it together and then they lost everything. They were wiped out. They had systems, they had certainty, they had resources. Everything is a risk. Everything. Getting married is risky. Having children is risky. Starting a business is risky. Going back to get yourself educated is risky. Asking for help is risky because you might not get the help. You might ask help to the wrong person and they devalue you. They invalidate you. They diminish or shame you. They might not even believe you, but it's all risky because actually getting support, asking for support can also you can be liberated. You can get redemption. You can get support. There is a lot of people out there who are shamed for medication when in reality, for example, for ADHD or whatever it may be, it is empowering to get that medication. The last thing that I wrote down here is that when we talk about suicide, what it does, it literally saves lives. Research shows that open, responsible conversations about suicide reduce stigma and increase the chances that someone will reach out before it's too late. One honest conversation might be the reason that someone chooses to stay. This is why I say to people all the time that you got to share your story. There are so many people out there that think that they're the only person who's ever gone through what they've gone through. But when we start to all share our stories and share what we've been through and what we've experienced, what ends up happening is we begin to see, my God, I'm not the only one. We're connected. Our suffering is not unique, it's actually universal. And so that's what I would encourage people to do. Those are some of the reasons that I think talking about suicide, talking about dark thoughts, those are some of the things that I think are beneficial. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Has this been your experience, or have you had a different experience to what I'm talking about? Maybe you've grown up in an environment or in a culture where, or you've been one of the lucky people who there's not even been a single person in your household who's had mental health, no depression, no anxiety. And so you're listening to this and you're like, Cassim, my God, you're going on about this stuff. No one goes through this. It's not that bad. I say to people, you do not really know what mental health is until you have had clinical depression. The disease is a disease. They're not wanting to get out of bed, not having any energy, not believing in anything, not believing in yourself, not desiring anything, not thinking beyond the day. It's a horrible disease. There are so many people, particularly within the Black community in Britain, who still stigmatize people for having ADHD, autism. There are many men, as I found out in my research, there are many men who've abandoned their children when their children have they've discovered that their child is have an HCP or a diagnosis for autism. They've rejected the child, they've abandoned the family, which is, you know, it from because I don't want to say I don't want to shame the man, but from their point, if you understand it from their point of view, they've never been educated about this kind of stuff. These conversations are not had. They're scared. They're fearful. They don't know what to do. They're disempowered. And this is why I say that as a community, we really need to start having these conversations. And I just don't think as a British society, we're having some of these conversations. I think we're having them in isolation and in small groups, but we're not having it nationally. And I think if we as a people can start to have these conversations and talk about these things on a national level, in families, in cultures, in faith positions or none, in friendship groups, I think it can really, really, truly save lives. So that's where I'm going to stop this week. As usual, please like and subscribe, comment. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What's been your experience of this? Please comment. I'd love to hear from you. Maybe there's a subject you'd like me to talk about around this subject. I'd love to hear from you. And as I said before, I have written a book about suicide called I Want to Kill Myself, a conversation with an unknown friend about suicide and the edge. It's available on Amazon if you'd like to have a look at it. Completely up to you. But otherwise, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And I will speak to you very soon. Bye for now.